I've been underestimated my whole life. I'm Madison Carter, 21, the one my parents always called the dreamer, which was their polite way of saying the disappointment. In the Carter family constellation, my older sister Olivia was the sun, blindingly bright, fiercely intelligent, the center of our universe. And I was Pluto, the cold, distant, forgotten rock nobody was even sure qualified as a planet. They said it with love, of course. Everything they did was coated in a thick, sweet veneer of parental affection that made it impossible to fight back. It was in the gentle tilt of my mother's head when I'd show her a painting instead of a perfect report card. "Oh, Maddie, that's creative." It was in my father's hearty, dismissive laugh when I said I wanted to understand the stories behind the stars, not just their chemical composition. "That's our little poet," he'd say, ruffling my hair before turning to Olivia to discuss her latest triumph in the state science fair. Olivia never had to fight for their approval. It flowed to her as naturally as gravity. She was a straight-A student, a debate champion, a neuroscience prodigy who was mapping neural pathways while I was still trying to figure out how to navigate the social labyrinth of high school. She was accepted into Yale's pre-med program with a full scholarship. The announcement of her acceptance was marked by a lavish dinner party where my father gave a toast that lasted 10 minutes, his voice thick with pride. That same week, I'd won a national essay competition. My prize was a small check and a certificate. My parents put it on the fridge, but it was quickly covered by a new photo of Olivia shaking hands with the dean. I became a background decoration in the masterpiece of my sister's life. So when I also got into Yale, everyone, including me, was a little shocked. "Humanities," my father had said, drawing out the word as if it tasted strange. "Well, that's wonderful, honey. You can support Olivia. Make sure she's eating properly." The implication was clear. My purpose at one of the world's most prestigious universities was not to learn, not to excel, but to be my sister's keeper. I was the sidekick, the emotional support animal for the real star. For 2 years I played the part. I lived in Olivia's shadow on campus just as I had at home. Her friends were my friends. Her schedule dictated our shared coffee breaks. I'd listen endlessly about her research on synaptic plasticity, about her brilliant, demanding professor, Dr. Eris Thorne, and about the ultimate prize for any undergraduate in the sciences, the Harrington Grant. The Harrington was more than money. It was a kingmaker. The grant was awarded to one undergraduate student in the entire university, across all disciplines, for the most innovative and promising research proposal. Winning it meant funding a faculty-mentored project, and a direct line to the most prestigious graduate programs in the country. It meant your name was etched into the hallowed stone of Yale's academic history. And this year, everyone knew Olivia Carter was going to win. Her proposal was a groundbreaking study on memory encoding in Alzheimer's patients. It was brilliant, important, and exactly the kind of thing the Harrington Committee adored. My parents were already planning the celebration. What they didn't know was that I was applying too. My project was born in the dusty, forgotten corner of the Sterling Memorial Library, in a section of ancient history that smelled of decaying paper and forgotten dreams. It was there I'd met Professor Finch. He was a legend in the classics department, a reclusive genius who had published 3 seminal books and then, a decade ago, had simply stopped. He was pale and thin, with eyes that seemed to see through you and into the very grammar of your thoughts. Most students were terrified of him. I was captivated. I had taken his seminar on my own, a small act of rebellion. While Olivia was in gleaming labs, I was in a stuffy room with 5 other students, translating obscure Latin texts. It was in one of those texts, a fragmented poem from a forgotten Roman poet, that I found my idea. The poet wrote of memoria ex machina, a memory from the machine, describing a complex mnemonic device used by orators, built not of words, but of physical spaces and symbolic objects. It was dismissed by most scholars as poetic fantasy. But I saw something else. I saw a system. A lost language of memory. My proposal, the one I poured my secret heart into, was to use modern computational analysis and virtual reality modeling to reconstruct this ancient mnemonic system. I wanted to prove that it wasn't just a metaphor, but a sophisticated cognitive technology. It was a bridge between the ancient humanities and modern neuroscience. It was everything I was. Part dreamer, part analyst. It was a project that could only have come from me. Professor Finch was the only person who knew. I'd approached him with the idea, my hands trembling as I held out my initial notes. He'd read them in silence in his cluttered office, the air thick with the scent of old books and Earl Grey tea. The silence stretched for an eternity. I felt the familiar cold dread of dismissal creeping up my spine. Then he looked up, and for the first time, his pale eyes seemed to shine with something other than academic fatigue. "This is either certifiably insane, Ms. Carter," he'd said, his voice a dry rustle, "or it's the most brilliant thing I've read in 20 years. He leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Let's get to work." For the next 6 months my life split in two. There was the Maddie everyone knew, the quiet, supportive sister who brought Olivia coffee during her late-night study sessions and listened to our parents' proud weekly updates. "Olivia's project is getting so much buzz, Maddie. Dr. Thorne thinks she's a shoo-in for the Harrington," my mother would chirp over the phone. "That's amazing, Mom," I'd say, my voice perfectly even, while sitting in Professor Finch's office, surrounded by 3D models of Roman architecture on my laptop screen and algorithms mapping lyrical structures. The other Maddie, the real Maddie, lived in the library and the computer lab. She worked with a quiet, ferocious intensity she never knew she possessed. Professor Finch pushed me harder than anyone ever had. He tore my drafts apart, challenged every assumption, and forced me to defend my ideas until I was exhausted and exhilarated. He never compared me to anyone. He simply saw my mind and demanded that I use it. For the first time I felt like the sun was shining on me, not just reflecting off my sister. The memory that fueled me most came from when I was 10. Our elementary school had an invention fair. Olivia, ever the scientist, built a flawless baking soda volcano with 3 different chambers for a multi-stage eruption. It was precise, clean, and impressive. My father, an engineer, had helped her with the wiring for the little LED lights that simulated lava. I had built a story machine. It was a large cardboard box painted with swirling galaxies. Inside, I'd created a system of hand-crank scrolls and illustrated cards that allowed you to combine different characters, settings, and plot twists to create a unique narrative. It was whimsical, a bit messy, and I had poured my entire soul into it. On the day of the fair, our parents came. They stood before Olivia's volcano for a full 15 minutes, listening to her explain the chemical reactions. My father beamed, patting her on the back. "That's my girl. A real engineer." Then they came to my booth. My mother looked at the story machine, a polite smile fixed on her face. "Oh, Maddie, what a vibrant imagination you have." My father peered inside. "It's very creative, sweetheart. But what does it do?" "It tells stories," I said, my voice small. "Right." He chuckled, ruffling my hair. "A dreamer. Just like your mother." He gave my shoulder a squeeze and then steered my mom back toward Olivia's table to watch another eruption. I stood there, my heart shrinking in my chest, watching them praise her for something real, something tangible, while my creation was dismissed as a flight of fancy. 21 years old, hunched over a laptop at 3 a.m., I could still feel the sting of that dismissal. My Harrington proposal was my story machine, rebuilt with steel and code and academic rigor. And this time they would not be able to look away. The day the Harrington finalists were announced, I was in the campus coffee shop with Olivia. She was vibrating with nervous energy, checking her email every 30 seconds. "I'm so antsy I could crawl out of my skin," she said, bouncing her knee. "Dr. Thorne said the committee was extremely impressed. But you never know. There's this guy from the physics department who designed a new kind of solar sail. It's all very competitive." "You'll be a finalist, Liv," I said, sipping my latte. My own heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My phone was face down on the table. "There's no way you won't be." "Thanks, Maddie." She gave me a rare, genuine smile. In moments like these, when her ambition wasn't a wall between us, I could almost forget the years of comparison. I could almost see her as just my sister. It would just mean so much. You know, for Dad. You knew. Winning the Harrington wasn't just for Olivia. It was for the glory of the Carter family name, a testament to my father's belief that rigor and science were the only pursuits of value. Her phone buzzed. She snatched it up. Her eyes scanned the screen, and a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. "I'm in," she breathed, her voice filled with triumphant relief. "I'm a finalist." "Of course you are," I said, mustering all the enthusiasm I could. "I told you." "That's incredible." She was already texting our parents. "They're going to lose their minds. Mom's probably already booking a hotel for the awards ceremony." She looked at me, her eyes shining. "You have to be there. In the front row." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. My own phone buzzed against the table. I ignored it. My moment could wait. For now I would play my part. I was the supportive sister. The shadow. But a shadow is only cast when a light is about to be turned on. The 2 weeks leading up to the Harrington Award ceremony were a masterclass in my family's unique brand of benevolent neglect. My parents called nightly, their voices giddy with excitement. The calls were for Olivia, of course. I'd be handed the phone for a brief, perfunctory chat at the end. "Are you making sure your sister is resting, Maddie?" my mother would ask. "She's under so much pressure. Maybe you could cook her a nice meal this weekend." "Her presentation has to be perfect," my father would add. "Maybe you could run her slides for her, check for typos. You're good with that sort of thing." I agreed to it all with a placid smile. My own acceptance letter, a secret fire burning in my pocket. There were 5 finalists. We had each been notified privately and told not to publicize it. The foundation preferred a grand reveal at the ceremony. I was listed as M. Carter, Department of Classics. Olivia was O. Carter, Department of Neuroscience. It was a clerical ambiguity I was counting on. To my family, there was only one Carter in the running. I practiced my own presentation with Professor Finch. Unlike the other finalists, who presented their work to a packed lecture hall, I presented mine to an audience of one in his silent, book-lined office. No, Ms. Carter," he'd said, stopping me midway through my explanation of the algorithm. "You're reciting." "Don't recite. You are the world's leading expert on this topic. In fact, you are the world's only expert on this topic. Like it. Tell us the story." So I did. I stopped reading from my notes and started talking about the lonely Roman poet, about the ghost of an idea that had haunted me, about the thrill of seeing a pattern emerge from the chaos of a dead language. When I finished, the air in the office was still. Professor Finch stared at me for a long moment. "Good," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Now go and make them listen." The night of the ceremony arrived with the crisp chill of a late New England autumn. The event was held in the university's Schwartzman Center, a breathtakingly modern glass and steel building that felt more like a cathedral to innovation than a campus hall. It was all soaring ceilings and glowing lights. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant dresses mingled, their laughter echoing in the vast space. My parents and Olivia were already there when I arrived. My mother was wearing a pearl necklace, my father a new tie. They were radiant, orbiting Olivia, who looked stunning in a sharp, dark blue dress. She was the picture of confidence. "Maddie, there you are," my mother called out, waving me over. She kissed my cheek, her perfume enveloping me. "Doesn't your sister look incredible? Like a winner?" "You look amazing, Liv," I said truthfully. "We got a great table right up front," my father said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Want to be able to see her face when they call her name." We sat down at a round table draped in white linen. I was seated between my mother and an elderly donor. The program was a thick, glossy booklet. On the 3rd page was the list of finalists. The 2025 Harrington Grant finalists. David Chen, Department of Physics. O. Carter, Department of Neuroscience. Carter, Department of Classics. Priya Sharma, Department of Economics. Benjamin Yates, School of Architecture. I watched as my mother scanned the list. Her brow furrowed for a fraction of a second when she saw the two Carters. "Oh, that's an odd coincidence," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "Another Carter." She tapped the program. "Look, Richard. Carter. Maybe we're related." My father glanced at it. Doubtful. Probably from the Boston Carters. He dismissed it and turned his attention back to Olivia, who was deep in conversation with Dr. Thorne at the next table. My heart was a frantic drum. They had seen my name right there in black and white, and their minds had simply refused to process it. The possibility that I, Madison, could be on that list was so alien, so completely outside the realm of their reality, that they had invented another family to explain it away. The pain of it was sharp and clarifying. It wasn't just that they didn't believe in me. It was that they had never, not for 1 second, even considered me. The ceremony began. The president of the university gave a speech, followed by the chairman of the Harrington Foundation. They spoke of innovation, of the future, of the brilliant young minds who were shaping it. I felt strangely calm, a stillness in the eye of the hurricane I had created. Then, the Dean of Academic Affairs, a formidable woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, stepped up to the podium to introduce the finalists and announce the winner. "Each year, the committee is faced with an impossible choice," she began, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "This year was no exception. Our 5 finalists represent the very best of Yale." She introduced each finalist, summarizing their project. David Chen and his solar sails. Priya Sharma and her model for predicting microloan defaults. Benjamin Yates and his design for sustainable urban housing. With each name, I could feel the tension at our table coiling tighter. "And from our neuroscience department," Dr. Reed continued, a warm smile on her face as she looked in Olivia's direction. "Olivia Carter. Her proposal for a new methodology to track early-onset Alzheimer's is not only academically rigorous but offers profound hope to millions. Olivia, your work is truly exceptional." The camera found Olivia, projecting her poised, smiling face onto the huge screens on either side of the stage. My parents squeezed her hands, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated pride. My father caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up, as if we were all part of the same victory. I just smiled back, a serene, empty smile. "Finally," Dr. Reed said, looking down at her notes, "our last finalist comes to us from an unexpected discipline. In a world rushing toward the future, this student had the audacity to look back, to find a conversation between the ancient world and our own." I leaned forward. My breathing was shallow. This was it. This project seeks to digitally reconstruct a lost Roman system of memory, the so-called Memoria ex Machina. It is a daring, brilliantly interdisciplinary work that combines classical philology with computational linguistics and virtual reality. It challenges our very definition of what constitutes data and technology. It is, in a word, a revelation. I saw a flicker of confusion on my father's face. He glanced at Olivia, but she was looking at the stage, her own brow furrowed. My mother was still smiling, but the smile was frozen. Dr. Reed looked up, her gaze sweeping the room. "Please congratulate our final finalist, Madison Carter." The name fell into the silence of our table like a stone. The spotlight operator, likely as confused as my parents, first swung the light toward Olivia again. She flinched, shaking her head slightly. The light wavered, searching. Then the camera found me. My face, pale and serious, filled the giant screens. I watched my mother's head snap towards me. Her mouth fell open. The program slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. My father stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. His face, which had been flushed with pride, was suddenly ashen with disbelief. But it was Olivia's expression that I will remember for the rest of my life. It wasn't anger or jealousy. It was something far more profound. It was the shattering of an entire worldview. The sun looking down and, for the very first time, seeing that another celestial body was capable of giving off its own light. The perfect, unshakable foundation of her universe had just cracked. In her eyes, I saw the question she had never thought to ask. Who are you? A polite, scattered applause started. Dr. Reed paused, waiting for it to build. Professor Finch, sitting at a table in the back, stood up and began to applaud loudly, his hands clapping with a slow, deliberate rhythm. A few of his colleagues joined in, then more people. The applause grew from a trickle to a wave. But I wasn't listening to them. I was watching my family. I was watching 3 people realize that the person they thought they knew didn't exist. And now, Dr. Reed said, her voice cutting through the noise, it is my great honor to announce the winner of the 2025 Harrington Grant. She opened a crimson envelope. The silence in the hall was absolute. This year's grant was awarded to the project the committee felt was the most transformative, the most forward-thinking, and the most beautifully audacious. She looked directly at me. The winner of the Harrington Grant is Madison Carter. For a second nothing happened. The world seemed to stop. Then Professor Finch was on his feet, his applause booming. The hall erupted. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely steady. As I moved out from behind the table, my mother reached for my arm, her fingers brushing my sleeve. "Maddie," she whispered, her voice thin and lost. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at any of them. I walked toward the stage, my head held high, stepping out of the shadow and into a light that was entirely my own. The walk to the stage was the longest and shortest journey of my life. The applause was a roaring in my ears, a physical force that seemed to hold me up. Every step was a deliberate act of severing the invisible threads that had tied me to their expectations. The dreamer, the creative one, the sidekick. The words dissolved with each footfall on the plush carpet. On stage, Dr. Reed shook my hand firmly, her eyes sparkling. "Congratulations, Ms. Carter. A truly well-deserved honor." She handed me the heavy crystal award. It was cool and solid in my hands, a tangible piece of a reality I had built for myself. I stepped up to the podium. The lights were blindingly bright. I looked out into the vast, dark hall, a sea of indistinct faces. I found my family's table. They were 3 frozen figures in a tableau of shock. My father was staring at me, his jaw slack. My mother had her hands pressed to her mouth. Olivia was perfectly still, her face a pale, unreadable mask. I took a deep breath, the microphone cool against my lips. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and steady. It didn't even tremble. "Thank you to the Harrington Foundation and to the selection committee. To be recognized tonight is an overwhelming honor." I paused, letting the words settle. I could have been gracious. I could have been magnanimous. I could have said something about family and support. The old Maddie would have. The Maddie who craved their approval, who would have done anything for a single crumb of the praise they showered on Olivia, would have tried to smooth this over, to make them comfortable in their shock. But that Maddie was gone. She had died somewhere between the library stacks and the lines of code. "There are many people who believe that the past is a dead thing," I continued, my eyes finding Professor Finch in the crowd. He gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "That the humanities are a soft pursuit, a luxury in a world that demands hard data and tangible results. They see stories as fanciful and poems as dreams. They are wrong. The past is not dead. It's not even past. It's a vast, untapped dataset of the human experience, and if we learn how to listen, it has so much to teach us." I looked back at my family's table, my gaze sweeping over them, not with anger, but with a kind of distant clarity. I want to thank the one person who, from the very beginning, saw the rigor in a dream, who taught me not to be afraid of an idea just because no one had had it before. Professor Alistair Finch, thank you for teaching me how to listen. I didn't mention them. Not my mother, not my father, not my sister. My gratitude was a spotlight, and I chose very deliberately where to shine it. The omission was louder than any accusation. It was a statement of fact. You were not part of this. This victory does not belong to you. "Thank you," I finished simply and stepped away from the podium. The applause that followed was even louder than before. Backstage, I was surrounded by a small crowd of well-wishers, committee members, professors, the other finalists. David Chen, the physics prodigy, shook my hand. "Your project sounds insane and brilliant," he said with a grin. "Congrats." Even Dr. Thorne, Olivia's mentor, came over to offer a stiff, formal congratulations. Eventually, the crowd thinned, and I was left alone with Professor Finch. "You made them listen, Ms. Carter," he said, a proud smile finally breaking through his usual academic reserve. "You taught me the language, Professor," I replied. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You always knew it. You just needed to believe you were allowed to speak it." When I finally came back out into the main hall, my family was waiting. They stood in a small, awkward cluster near the exit, a desolate island in the celebratory stream of people flowing around them. The party was in full swing, but their corner of the room was shrouded in a thick, uncomfortable silence. My father was the first to speak. He cleared his throat, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Madison," he said, and my name sounded foreign on his tongue. That was quite a surprise." "I'm sure it was," I said, my voice neutral. "We had no idea," my mother whispered, her eyes wide and pleading. "You never said a word. Why didn't you tell us?" The question hung in the air between us, so full of genuine, painful ignorance. "Why didn't I tell you?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me. Because you would have called it a cute hobby. Because you would have told me to focus on helping Olivia with her real work. Because in the story of our family, I was not a character who did things like this." But I didn't say any of that. "I was busy," I said instead. Finally, Olivia stepped forward. The shock had receded from her face, replaced by a complex storm of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Humiliation, grudging respect, and a deep, soul-shaking confusion. "How?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was the same question I'd seen in her eyes. "All that time, in the library. I thought you were just studying." "I was," I said. I looked at the sister I had spent my life adoring and resenting in equal measure. I was studying. There was nothing more to say. The chasm between us was too wide. They were seeing me for the first time, but I had been seeing them clearly for years. The power dynamic had shifted. I held the Crystal Award in my hand, and it felt like a shield. "Well," my father said, trying to muster some of his old booming authority and failing. We should celebrate. We'll take you out to dinner. Wherever you want to go." The offer was a desperate, clumsy attempt to reclaim the narrative, to fold this shocking new plot twist back into the familiar story of the successful Carter family. I gave them a small, sad smile. "Thank you, but I already have plans." I looked over their shoulders and saw Professor Finch waiting for me by the door, along with a few of my friends from the seminar, the people who had debated Latin grammar with me at midnight. My people. I walked past my family. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't look back. As I reached the grand glass doors of the atrium, I could feel their eyes on my back, 3 pairs of eyes, trying to understand the stranger who had been their daughter and their sister. Stepping out into the cold, clear night, I took a deep breath. The air was sharp and clean in my lungs. I hadn't won the Harrington Grant for them. I hadn't done it to prove them wrong. I had done it to prove me right. Their shock wasn't my victory. My victory was the work itself. It was the quiet, thrilling confidence of knowing my own mind. Their approval was no longer the sun I orbited. It was just a distant, fading star in a galaxy where I was finally charting my own course. And I was heading somewhere new. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left, and thank you for watching.